Okay. Uh, I'd like to welcome everybody. It is noon. I am delighted to have you join us for the third of our webinar lunchtime series, Lunchtime at the Maritime Aquarium, Lunchtime with the Maritime Aquarium. As you know, we are closed, but we are still very active behind the scenes. And the first webinar that we had 2 weeks ago was all on our animal husbandry and everything we're doing behind the scenes to continue to provide the best care for our animals. Last week's webinar was everything we are doing for you all out in the region, across the country, in terms of our education programs. We have stood up almost overnight a complete roster of virtual education programs. You will see those, some of those in today's discussion, which is all about citizen science. And the third prong of what we do beyond the exhibits and our animals and our education is our conservation work. But conservation just doesn't turn on experts and scientists. Conservation very often depends on you all, what you see and what you report, and how you can help feed the body of information that goes into the scientific community to make decisions. So I'm particularly excited by today's topic. And to help me with the discussion today, I've got two of the staff of the Maritime Aquarium, Bridget Severo and Dave Hudson. And Dave, I'm going to invite you to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Dave Hudson. I'm the research scientist here at the aquarium. I've been here for a little over 3 years, and I've been primarily trying to broaden our partnerships and deepen our scientific commitment to the Long Island Sound and beyond. I'm excited to be here with you today.
Okay, thanks very much. And next, I want to ask Bridget to introduce herself.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Bridget Cervero. I'm an education manager. Part of what I oversee is our citizen science programs, and I've been with the aquarium for 10 years now.
Thanks very much, Bridget. Now, I'm going to start with the question, but for those of you joining us, you are welcome. This is not a conversation just between Dave, Bridget, and myself. This is a conversation with all of you. And I want to make sure that that you all can join the discussion. So feel free to use the chat function at the bottom of your screen and fire your questions to all of us as panelists, and I will feed them into the discussion as we move along. So Bridget, the first question for you is, what is citizen science?
So citizen science is really just a partnership. It's a collaboration between scientists and researchers and volunteers looking to get involved. And there's really great benefits for everybody. So for the researchers and the scientists, they're getting extra help collecting their data and doing the research, where volunteers are getting some really tremendous hands-on experience and really contributing to true science, which is exciting.
Well, thanks. And so let me say, it's one thing to go out in your backyard and observe a new bird species that you haven't seen, observe some insects, be out on the boat and see some seabirds there, or catch a new fish if you're recreational fishing. That alone does not make you a citizen scientist, right?
Yeah, you need to kind of take it to the next step. So it's one thing to be seeing birds at our feeders. I'm seeing birds at my feeder out the window right now, even on this rainy day, but that's only going to me. But to really contribute to science, we need to report it. And there's a lot of great platforms that we'll kind of mention today where you can take it to the next step and not just see something, but share what you're seeing with others.
Okay, thanks. And we're going to talk a lot about how to do that, how Dave and Bridget use the information that citizen scientists report up. And for that, let me start with the sense that this is a very collaborative effort, that it is not just us at the aquarium or you all as individuals, but it involves partners all through the region. And Dave, you've worked with a lot of these partners, so give us a sense of how we put together a citizen science portfolio.
Right. So, and this is not by far even an exhaustive list of all of our research and conservation partners, but Essentially, this is like Bridget said, this is a collaboration between NGOs like us, like Connecticut's Beauty Zoo, universities like the Yale Peabody Museum, Western Connecticut State University, Sacred Heart, the state in Connecticut DEP, DOT, and local fishermen. So we are really heartened that we get really great information from recreational fishermen and folks like Trout Unlimited doing really great things, and folks like Cobb's Island Oysters, which is right across town from us, keeping an eye on what's actually going on out there. So it takes a lot of work together to bring this together.
So businesses, academics, kids of all ages, adults, families, governments. This is an all-out effort here, right?
It is.
Okay. So we had at the Maritime Aquarium, we ourselves have engaged in a number of citizen science initiatives. One was just concluded last week, right? The City Nature Challenge. Bridget, give us a quick overview of some of the citizen science projects which you're involved.
Sure. So the one that we're looking at here is the City Nature Challenge, as Jason mentioned. And the idea of this, it's cities across the world going out and trying to just capture as many observations of nature and wildlife that they can during these few days. So we were really excited. It was our first time participating in this one. And we'll talk more about it later to share some of the results.
Right, great. And then another one in which you've involves frogs.
Yeah, so one of the sure signs of spring are hearing those frogs calling. And one great citizen science project that's run through AZA, the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, is Frog Watch. And what that is local chapters are training volunteers to identify frogs in their region by their calls. So what we're looking at here is kind of a summary of the different frogs our chapter heard last year.
Okay, what's your favorite frog call?
Oh, my favorite frog call is probably the peeper because it's just a sign of spring, but my favorite frog is the gray tree frog because they can camouflage so well.
Okay, thanks. And we do a lot. So a lot of what Dave and Bridget have talked about are what we do on land, but citizen science and the information that school kids find are very much relevant on the water as well. So let me give everybody who's tuning in a sense of how we work with our state-of-the-art clean energy research vessel, Spirit of the Sound. It's a great vessel. It's powered by lithium batteries. So no diesel, no oil, no dirty fuel. It's completely clean. It's completely soundless. It's noiseless. So when you're out on the sounds you hear are not the engine, but it's the sound of the sound. And if you guys have not been on our vessel yet, certainly when we reopen and we can ensure everybody comes back with safe social distancing practices, please join us for a cruise on the Spirit of the Sound. But this will give you a little taste of all the school kids and the excursions we have, again, which feeds into the data that we use to understand the health and the trends that are taking place in Long Island Sound. Okay. So now I want to ask you guys to go into what we just saw, what the kids are doing, and how all of that feeds into the work that we use for conservation of Long Island Sound. But before I do, a question back to some of the terrestrial work we do. What about people making pollinator pathways in their home gardens and then taking the pledge? And Bridget, give us a sense of how people are not just making observations, but they're actually taking conservation measures like building these pollinator pathways and then feeding that into the information that scientists and policymakers are using?
Sure. So pollinator pathways are a wonderful thing we can be doing to our yard. And the idea is to be creating these kind of corridors of natural plants for pollinators to be able to survive, right? And get their food naturally. And so that's definitely an action we can certainly be taking on our own, with it, whether it's in our yards or at local parks or communities. And so that is something that's growing in popularity. And there's ways we can even take it to the next level and then report back on what we're seeing in those pollinators. So things like sharing when we're seeing the honeybees or the native butterflies. So it's definitely a great way we can be getting involved in helping with a great conservation project right in our homes. I'm glad someone brought that up.
Okay, thanks. And while you've got the floor, why don't you tell us about some of the school kids and the groups that are on the vessel, and then Dave will turn to you about how all of that information is used.
Sure. So the RV, Spirit of the Sound, or RVS for short, is often a highlight for a lot of our visitors and our students. So we do lots of different programs aboard our vessel, but the one that we do most frequently with students and with the public is our Marine Life Encounter Cruise. And on those, we're able to get out there, take some different sampling from the water, which is what we saw at the video, those nets at the surface collecting plankton. We're using that big metal cage to look at the bottom to dredge, and we also have that nice net. And the great thing about it is the vessel is really appropriate for so many people. For a lot of school groups, we'll get kids that have never been out on a boat before coming out with us, which is exciting. Or we're getting families coming out together in the public. Actually, in the bottom right corner, that's my niece, Natalie, that I took out on the vessel as soon as she was tall enough. So the only requirement's 42 inches.
All right, thanks, Bridget. Dave.
Yeah, so the work that we do out on the vessel is really important because, again, anybody that's coming out on the vessel they're collecting data that we'll talk about a little bit later about some of the importance of those data. But everybody who's coming out on this is a citizen scientist, and there are a couple of other organizations that we partner with, particularly Harbor Watch in the area. We're working, trying to work more across the Sound, Save the Sound, and others on projects like this, to then get the data that are contained in these citizen science projects out there. So they're really great for detection. They're really great for the long-term data sets that are really hard for us as scientists to get our hands on. And it's, quite frankly, a really hard thing to fund. Because going to the government and saying, I'd like to fund a long-term study for 40 years, it's been done, but it's kind of a hard sell. So it's really great to have these efforts in there.
All right, thanks, Dave. So another question coming in from our audience: why is Long Island Sound called Long Island Sound? And with an emphasis on the sound part, what's the sound as a body of water?
Bridget?
Sure. So the Long Island Sound, what it means, it's essentially a body of water that's enclosed on three sides, sort of like the opposite of a peninsula in a way. And another really great thing about the Long Island Sound, you might hear it called an estuary, and that's a place where the fresh and the salt water are mixing. So the Long Island Sound is this partially enclosed body of water that has this mixed type of water called brackish water.
And I would add that our particular estuary used to be a lake. So back during the glacial maximum, this was a freshwater lake that then, as sea levels rose, seawater poured into it, and then it became an estuary. So it's a really interesting place.
Thanks. And another question back to the land. We've been planting milkweed. This is one of our audience members. Been planting milkweed and clover and seeing increased biodiversity in the yard. Congratulations to you. Now here's the question: are you reporting it? Are you taking all of those observations that you're making and letting the scientific community know? And you're actually welcome to reply on the chat. It'll come to me. But before the end of this session, both Bridget and Dave will give you a sense, if you're not reporting, how you might be and how all of those observations that you're making in your backyard gardens or on your walks can be used by the scientific community. Okay, so next up, Dave, give us a sense. So one of our more well-known and one of our more exciting projects, in fact, it's coming up in another month or two because we're into the season. Tell us a little bit about Project Limulus, and let's start with what a Limulus is.
So Limulus polyphemus is the the gritty Latin name for our local horseshoe crab species that runs from our area all the way down into the Yucatan and Mexico. So this is a really important species locally and coasts really all over the eastern coast of North America. There's certainly right now, there's a biomedical use for their blood, which email me and we'll get into a longer conversation about that. But it's also a really, really important animal for for local ecosystems. It's a bioturbator, so it moves things around in sediments. And right now, you can go out appropriately socially distanced and spaced to observe them laying eggs. So this is the time of year, May into June, at high tide during full moons. They come up onto the sand and lay eggs in the sand. So the really important part of this is I kind of liken their eggs to the power bars of the North Atlantic. They help get our migratory birds from South America up into our estuaries up here. And it's just an incredibly important animal. We've been tagging these animals with Sacred Heart University for almost going on 8 years, I think, right? And these data have really allowed scientists to make really great decisions about their management. So we have a lot to thank with our citizen scientists for this project.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Dave. And give us a sense of what we got here. So horseshoe crabs next month, they're going to come in evening. They're going to mate, and tell us about the life cycle and again, how that feeds into some of your studies.
Right. So we're really so the figure on the left, you can actually see a newly hatched horseshoe crab. They're very tiny. And then to grow, they molt. So they'll molt that skeleton and grow a little bit larger, just like a crab or lobster. And they generally get to about reproductive size about a decade later. So when we're thinking about the life cycle and trying to restore them, we really have to think about the whole life history of the animal. So it's a really incredible animal where they're not doing too well in the Northeast. So we're really trying to drill down as to what's going on with stress, what's going on with climate change, what's happening in the environment that could be influencing that.
Okay, thanks. And here's a great video. Dave, why don't you walk us? Why don't you walk us through what we got here?
Right. So you'll see a young horseshoe crab that's probably 4 months old walking across. You can see they blend in pretty well, and they essentially will forage along the top of the sand, and then they'll bury themselves down in. So this is something from our cultivation rack, which I'll zoom over to a little bit later. No pun intended, since we're on Zoom. But we actually have been able to watch this progression over the last year.
And Dave, how many times have these little critters already molted? You're looking at, give us a sense.
Those were probably 4 or 5. They molt pretty quick. They molt a lot in the first year. And then the larger ones, they generally molt a much less, it's a much lesser rate at that point. So as they get larger, they molt less often.
Right. Okay. Now, a couple of questions that I want to field before we move into our next citizen science project with our next critter. Mm-hmm. So there was a question on what is citizen science, and we answered that at the top of the webinar. For anybody who might have missed it, Bridget, give us a quick one-sentence description of citizen science.
Sure. Citizen science is also sometimes known as community science, and it's this idea of a partnership, having volunteers help scientists in research complete their studies. Okay, thanks.
And another question from a teacher among the audience. Teacher of 4 and 5 year olds, are they encouraged to be citizen scientists and report their findings? How young is too young to be a citizen scientist?
I honestly think the earlier the better. It's one of those situations where I would say I would love for them to get involved. It would be great if a parent or a grown-up can be helping them to do it properly. But any type of connection with nature, and I really think when you're making these observations and reporting, it's no longer just a butterfly. It's that butterfly that I reported last week. So it builds that love of nature. So I think as soon as you can, it's great.
Good. Okay, Dave, so let's talk a little bit about yet another citizen science project we got, terrapin tracking.
Yes. And well, diamondback terrapins are aside from being a really great local animal, I think they're my favorite freshwater turtle. They're technically a freshwater turtle. You can see that they have walking legs. They're not a sea turtle. They don't have flippers. But one of the great, as a physiologist, this animal can actually deal with salt. So you'll see it in salt marshes. You'll see them in very high numbers in the summer, sunning themselves in our estuaries. And the other important part is that they will be crossing roads this summer to do some nesting. So we've had some issues with these guys getting struck by cars. And we've really been concerned, as has Connecticut DEP, Western Connecticut State University, about trying to figure out where the major crossing points are for protecting these guys and putting up some signs. So that's a citizen science effort that's just starting.
And Dave, hold on. Let us get a good look of let us get a good look of them, front and back, and bottom and top. Okay.
Top, you really see they have this beautiful, beautiful carapace, and they're just an absolutely incredible animal. It's about as big as they get. But we do get people confusing these with sea turtles. They're not sea turtles.
Well, first of all, they're a lot smaller. The sea turtles, of course, spend most of their life in the marine environment. Tell us quickly about well, sea turtles have flippers. What do these guys have? Why don't you point that out?
So these have walking legs, and they certainly have claws. And again, they do come up on land and much further up to nest than sea turtles do. So these. Right. You can also blame these for stopping airport traffic at JFK from time to time.
All right, great. And let me go back to the deck for a minute because, up until now, we've been talking about critters that we find in, that's another picture of a terrapin. But we've been talking about what we see in our own backyards, what we see in our local neighborhoods, but citizen science is worldwide and applies to the biggest, some of the biggest and most endangered megafauna that we have on Earth, and that includes sharks and whales. Dave, give us a sense of some of the citizen science efforts for these species.
Certainly. Let's start with whales to start, because we do have whales from time to time in Long Island Sound, and any photos and location data that citizens can provide the National Marine Fisheries Service are really important to figuring out how whales are using these environments as they recover. And we certainly have a very small population of northern right whales as well. So any data that people can contribute allow us as scientists and as managers to really better protect them in their environment. One of the other really great things is work like the recreational fishermen do. So there's a group called Trout Unlimited that we've worked with in the past. They work on freshwater systems. And this is, if you're a fisherman, you need to know a lot about your environment and what's coming through. And recreational fishers know a lot about what's going on locally. And they contribute some really great data for us to know more about our rivers and streams, especially as we have dams coming down in Connecticut.
Right.
And
okay.
If you're traveling and you're a diver, one of my favorites is spot a shark. We were involved in funding the postdoc who got this off the ground. And North Carolina Aquariums, if you happen to be heading down to the Outer Banks and doing diving down there, just taking a picture underwater, you can be a citizen scientist by submitting that to Spot a Shark USA, and it IDs the shark for you. So there's a program that will ID the individual, and we have a better idea for how these animals are using these spaces, because there are more of you than there are of us. So it's really great to really have the power of people who are out on the water to tell us where these animals are.
Right. Okay, listen, before we move to the next slide, I just gave everybody a sneak preview. We've got a number of questions that are coming in from our audience, so let me fire a few out at you guys. A couple relate to marine mammals, a few interesting ones. The first is, why do we not have any whales in the Maritime Aquarium? As the president and CEO, and I'm not even sure I properly introduced myself at the top of the hour, but I am Jason Patlis, the president and CEO of the Maritime Aquarium. There's a number of reasons why we don't have whales. The biggest one is space. Whales need huge amounts of space. And even the whales that are in some of the larger aquariums in the country, George Aquarium, Mystic Aquarium, if you've been upstate in Mystic, the space that is provided for those whales is very significant. And even those whale species are among the smallest whale species that exist. And at the Maritime Aquarium, we have over 6,000 critters, 310 species. So there's a lot to see. The biggest ones we have are our harbor seals and our sharks. And, and so that's, there's a lot to see even without the whales. The other question is whether we've got any kind of rehabilitation facilities for marine mammals. And Dave, why don't I throw that to you?
Right.
The question was specifically for marine mammals, but some of the rehab work that you do generally would be great to summarize.
So again, when we get into the type of facility you have to do rehab, we work very closely. Most of our aquarists are trained to respond to strandings in this particular part of the state. And we work with the Marine Stranding Network to make sure that those animals, whether they're seals, whether they're other marine mammals, or whether they're sea turtles. We've had sea turtle strikes during the summertime in Long Island Sound. People don't think they're here, but there are snowbirds, right? And we do need people to keep an eye out for that, slow down, and report it. Give us a call, give the Stranding Network a call, and we'll get those animals to appropriate rehab center. We're also working through AZA. I'm the vice chairman of the AZA Safe Sea Turtles program, and that encompasses some of the Stranding Network as well. And we're trying to make sure that we strengthen those partnerships across zoos, aquariums, and other organizations that are doing rescue.
Thanks. So you get a shout out, Dave. One of our guests is from North Carolina, and appreciated your observations on sharks, the shark conservation work being done down there. And for you, Bridget, question about whether high school students can participate with us. And that's a big question. We covered a lot of that last week, but give us a quick rundown of just the different ways that high school students and their teachers could participate with us.
Sure. So we try really hard to keep our high school students engaged. When we are open and able to have everyone join us, we run a teen after school and out of school program that they can join. Each one has different sessions. So from marine technology to garden themes, they kind of run the gamut on what can be covered there. But then a lot of our citizen science programs that we do, so I have high school students doing frog watch, we have teens coming out tagging horseshoe crabs. So there's a lot of great opportunities. And on our website under citizen science, you can see all the things we're involved in, and they're, I think, all appropriate for high school students.
Okay, thanks. One of the tendencies of scientists is to use, and lawyers, of which I am one, is to use acronyms. So somebody asked, what is AZA? We refer to AZA. That's the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. We are a member of AZA. Most of the zoos and aquariums in the country are. The standards for joining AZA are actually incredibly high. And it goes to animal care, and it goes to education, and it goes to conservation, it goes to visitor services. If you are going to a zoo or an aquarium, you should be looking to go to an AZA facility, and I will make a very gratuitous plug, completely unrelated to citizen science, to say that for all of you out there mesmerized by Tiger King on Netflix, that ain't the way facilities are supposed to manage wild animals, in particular, highly endangered and apex predators in terms of species. AZA has taken a great stand in terms of just trying to distinguish between those institutions and what we do. And, and the standards are very high. There are about 250 or thereabouts zoos and aquariums in the country that belong to AZA. And we're proud to be one of them. So back to citizen science. The follow-up question on that, how do you know if a zoo or aquarium is an AZA member? Usually they advertise it pretty well. It is a badge of honor. We certainly have it on all of our social media and our literature. I think you go to AZA website and there'll be a list of all of their members there. You know, again, I think, yeah, they should advertise, and places that won't have it. Dave, what are you pointing to?
I've got some friends who've come to hang out here with us, so yeah, we've got some salmonids here.
All right. So, okay, back to citizen science. We are looking at a crab. This is not a native to Long Island. Give us a sense, Dave, of what we're looking at here, and again, how our citizen science efforts relate to the species and relate to conservation.
Right. So this is the Chinese mitten crab. This one was pulled up by our friends over at Cops Island Oysters, and we were actually we were able to publish a first record for this one. It's an animal that is, as an invader, really disrupts the ecosystem. This also often costs us a lot of money. This particular animal damages infrastructure by burrowing in, and it's done in the hundreds of millions of dollars worth of damage to rivers and streams and infrastructure in those rivers and streams and around the world. So it's really concerning that we're seeing it here. If anybody sees any animal with hairy claws, it shouldn't be here. So give me a call.
Right. Okay.
You guys help protect it. So thank you.
So again, you know, now let's pivot from the whole panoply of ways that we talk about citizen science and the ways people can engage. Moving now into the value of citizen science and how it shapes your work. So addressing, mitigating adverse effects from invasive species like this is one way. Again, going back to data collected off the Spirit of the Sound. We've got long-term data sets, Dave, again, obtained from students and from families, and they tell you a lot about climate change, right? And impacts of climate change on Long Island Sound.
They sure do. And our research vessel goes and does, the trawl, I'll say, is in one specific spot in the outer Norwalk Harbor, and has been done for almost 30 years. So the fact that we used to pick up about a lobster a trip and even had some serious peaks of way more than that, was significant. And you could basically see a lobster if you hopped on our vessel. That's not the case anymore. I think we probably rarely pick one up, or there are some years where we haven't picked up any of late. But what we've started to see is blue crabs. And blue crabs are one that doesn't usually overwinter well in a cold place. We kind of consider them kind of the Maryland state animal in a lot of ways. When we think of our friends from Maryland, I have a lot of friends from Maryland. And but there's a viable fishery in the next couple of years. You can go out and catch. I've seen dinner plate sized crabs right in the Norwalk River, right outside the aquarium. This is in our data set that you guys have helped us collect. We've actually seen this climate change signal. So the cold water animals are moving north. If you could go to the next slide really quick. So we have cold water animals that are moving up and deeper. And some of the commercial fisheries data is really paralleled with the data that we've pulled up. So it's really exciting to see how our work plugs into better management practices in our region.
Terrific, thanks. And before we go to you, Bridget, in terms of taking a deeper dive, as you promised earlier, into the City Nature Challenge, let me work in a few more comments and questions from our audience. Back to AZA membership and the community of zoos and aquariums. For those of you who travel across the country, there are often reciprocal arrangements within AZA membership. So if you are a member of, let's say, the Maritime Aquarium, and you're off in Monterey, and you want to go to the Monterey Bay Aquarium, you very well will get a discount for the admission there because you're a member of us. And similarly, for our audience down in North Carolina, if they're a member at one of the AZA facilities down there and they come to visit us in Norwalk, Connecticut, we are working on a discount. Actually, we're just in the middle of standing that up when COVID-19 hit. But you know, in short order, we will have reciprocal discounts for AZA members. And with that, let me turn it over to you, Bridget, to walk through, again, how you use the City Nature Challenge, which was a great, very active event. We had a ton of participation. How does that actually play into conservation efforts?
Great. So the City Nature Challenge, as I mentioned before, it's kind of a competition between cities across the globe to see who can make the most observations of nature and get the most people engaged. Now this year, because of everything that's going on, the challenge component was sort of taken away, but we were really still encouraging folks to get outside and take observations of their own backyard. As I mentioned before, this was our first time getting involved, and then of course with all the rapid changes, we really weren't sure what to expect as far as participation goes. So really anyone joining and sharing their observations was a huge success to me, but as we can see here, we're looking at along the bottom, we've made, actually this is an older slide, over 3,000 observations. So 3,000 pictures of nature or noticings of nature were recorded using this app called iNaturalist that we'll talk a little bit more about shortly. Over 780 species, which is just incredible. And again, that can be plants, animals, fungus, bugs, birds, whatever it might be. And then lastly, the number of observers, which is great. So over 350 people in our little area that we selected, which was Fairfield and Westchester counties, got out and made these observations during this set weekend between April 24th and 27th. And some of the pictures on the right here are some of those observations that folks made. The top two are kind of beautiful nature pictures. We have a squirrel and trillium, which is a beautiful flower. But that bottom one I think is so great. It's a bobcat walking through someone's yard. And that's the idea of really understanding, connecting with what's happening just right outside of your door. And it can be happening everywhere.
I saw a coyote in Norwalk too, so it's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have coyotes running around New Rochelle here in Westchester, and we've got deer passing through our yards and plenty of hedgehogs. Bridget, you know, City Nature Challenge has grown beyond all expectations, right? It started as a competition between two cities, and where's it gone since?
Yeah, so again, it started with these two cities. It's grown globally, and this graph, what we're looking at here, is I think the greatest part about City Nature Challenge. We're getting great observations. So last year, over 1,100 rare endangered species were recorded. So those are noticings that are being shared with the scientific community. So a massive number. But the graph here, I want to just take a quick minute to explain to really show the power of this fun event. Is it not only gets people engaged during those weekends, and we can see those peaks on the graph, but we're seeing that kind of step stool too. So we're seeing people do it, they enjoy the competition, but then a lot of people are continuing on and continuing to make these nature observations. And the more people we can be doing that, the more documentation we can get of things like invasive species or rare species, or even noticing species trends, because again, this is happening all over the world.
Right, great. And that, you know, and that brings to where we want to close with. You know, we've got a couple of minutes left. If you guys have any more questions, get them in for the few minutes we've got. But, you know, we talked a little bit about citizen science, the breadth and the variety of programs that have been stood up, the impact and the value of citizen science. Some of the questions we've gotten throughout the 45 minutes and that we said we would answer at the end is how people can participate. So why don't you walk us through what we've got here and how people can be citizen scientists themselves?
Sure. So we at the aquarium like to offer a lot of kind of in-person opportunities, but right now that's a little bit challenging. So we've been coming up with a list of some really great resources you can all be doing from your home so they can still be happening safely and distance socially and be contributing. So iNaturalist, as I mentioned, was the platform that we used to capture that City Nature Challenge information. And it's as simple as an app on your phone. You take a picture of whatever you're seeing and record when. And as we were talking about at the beginning, it's not just noticing what it is, but then once you input it, it's being shared to this massive global database that's totally accessible to everybody. So we're getting that kind of big information, long-term data, as Dave was mentioning as well. The next one here is eBird, which is one of my favorites. I'm a self-admitted bird nerd. I could watch birds all day. And it's, again, that thing where we are watching our feeders and like, okay, but it's just that one central place where we can be recording the birds that we're noticing. Also a free app or online platform as well. And that one has, I believe, over 700 million observations recorded in there. And I recommend checking out some of the migration maps that have been made as a result of those inputs from all the people that were logging what they saw. They were able to create these really beautiful maps showing how different birds migrate over the course of the year. So it's a really cool one. Zooniverse is one that even if maybe we live in apartments, we really can't get outside, we can be doing solely from our laptops or our phones. It's a place where researchers can be sharing kind of their massive amounts of data that they need help sorting through, whether it's transcribing things that were handwritten and starting to type them in, or looking through huge sets of photographs from maybe trail cameras or even satellites up in space. And they can train you on how to help and point out what you're seeing. And then the last one's a really perfect one for springtime, and it's a focus on plants and just, again, recording their life cycle and noting what you're noticing about the plant when they're budding, when they're flowering. And again, it's sharing that information. And that one's really cool because, as we can imagine, when flowers are blooming, that can also be telling some stories about a changing climate as well, similar to the blue crabs. So these are just a handful of a lot of opportunities. We do have these listed in a bit more detail, including where you can sign up and join them on our website, maritimeaquarium.org/citizenscience, to learn more about these projects.
Okay, thanks, Bridget. And one question, it's a good question as we look to wrap up. What's next on the agenda for us? Let me say as a preface before I let either of you guys answer that. As you know, being closed, not being able to have our doors open for all of you, this effort, this weekly webinar, the education programs that we've got online, the social media and virtual aquarium that we're bringing out through Facebook and other platforms are all ways to bring the aquarium into your homes, since you are no longer able for the moment to come into our home. So follow us through the various social media platforms. Come check out our website. We have a full suite of activities every week in terms of the family programs, education programs, outdoor activities that we post. So there's a lot that we are looking to keep everybody busy doing. But with that preface, Bridget, Dave, what's on the radar for you? I know we've got Project Limulus. If we could get outside, the horseshoe crabs will be returning for breeding in the next couple of months. But do we have any programs or any events scheduled specifically on citizen science?
So great question. As you mentioned, there are kind of a few things in flux right now. I do want to add to those public programs. Next week's were just posted, and Wednesday at 4, I do another one on citizen science. So I'll choose one of these options that we talked about here to go into in a lot more detail. So if you're interested, certainly check that out. And then again, our boat, as soon as we're able to be getting back out on the water, collecting those samples, that's probably the next one that will happen as soon as we can. What would you say, Dave?
Well, we'll be out on the boat with doing the unified water study, which is it's kind of a hybrid effort because there are a lot of scientists and universities involved, but there are some small citizen science groups involved. There are large efforts like that, and banding together locally is a really great way for you to make a big impact on your local environment. So it's really important just to be active, and like we always say, science is observing it and reporting it. So as long as we're doing that, I think we'll be great. We're gonna keep following us. We're doing a lot of other research as well, and getting onto the field. So we'll make those opportunities available as they come up.
All right, thanks, Dave. So just to wrap up, I want to first of all, let me say, for those of you again interested in our programs, just this morning we posted next week's schedule for all of our family programs, and registration's open. So please go to our website and take a look. The offerings range from preschool and toddler age for your kids all the way up through high school seniors. And they run from book readings on up to citizen science programs that are being led by Bridget and Dave. And so, so sign up for those. But let me thank you all for joining. You know, and let me thank you in particular if you are a member of the Maritime Aquarium, if you are a donor to the Maritime Aquarium. These days when we are closed, we are without any revenue at all. What revenue we get are from the donations that you've been making for the education programs that you've been making through our online donation functions. As a member, your dollars still work whether you're visiting or not. I know a lot of members come and join because if you come more than twice, you more than make up the price of membership. But those membership dollars work whether you were there or not, because they support all of the work that we've talked about today, the education programs we talked about last week. Your donations now more than ever are extraordinarily critical. They are our lifeline because that is the only revenue we have coming in. So please, if you like what you see, come join us again next week. We will be announcing next week's program very soon, and you know, consider a contribution to the Maritime Aquarium. With that, thank you all for your attention. It's great to have you. I love doing these things. And thank you, Bridget. Thank you, Dave. And thank you to everybody for tuning in for the last 45 minutes. Have a wonderful weekend and a wonderful week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.